Welcome to the end of January and the end of a really good reading month for me. By my count, I read 15 books this month, which seems ridiculous. 2 of them were manga, 2 of them I don't have with me, and the other 11 make up an enormous stack that I'm scared to touch, and it was really difficult making a thumbnail picture from them. But I did it. Looking at the stack now, this was a great month. Just in terms of how much enjoyment I had reading these books. I read a lot of really great things. So let's run through them. I'm not going to do them in the order that I read them in, just because the stack. I'm scared of the stack. Let's just go from the top. This is Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. I was an enormous fan of her debut novel, Our Wives Under the Sea. It was my second favourite novel of 2022. Numbers. But I confess I'd never read her debut short story collection, Salt Slow, until now, and yep, it's great. I actually picked up a copy while I was at a bookshop in London where I watched Julia Armfield interview Heather Parry. The two of them had an amazing chat about the Gothic, and then at the end I confessed to Julia that I hadn't read her first book, and so I bought a copy and she signed it. See? She's an angel, she's a wonderful person, she's hilarious, and this collection pretty much reflects that. It is a dark, twisted collection of tales that often come with mystery and twists and turns. Some of them are queer, some of them are not, or at least not explicitly. And they are generally designed to disturb and make us feel slightly uncomfortable. This is a wonderful little collection. And I think it's really cool that someone's debut book was a collection of short stories. That doesn't happen very often. Although, it actually happened to another author, that's also in this stack, who we'll get to. This was my first read of 2023, Sundial by Katrina Ward. I made a video about it, and now that I've sat on it a little bit, I feel a little bit differently about it. In my video, I talked about how I think this is a better book than her previous book, The Last House on Needless Street, which I did prefer. I personally enjoyed Needless Street more. And I thought that Sundial, despite me liking the other book more, was a more ambitious novel with bigger themes being tackled. And I still think that's true, but looking back now, I'm already starting to forget key aspects of Sundial. A few of the twists are getting muddled in my brain, whereas Needless Street, I honestly think I could recount page for page. So Needless Street had a much greater impact on me. I remember so much of it in so much detail, and this, not so much. So now I'm starting to feel differently. Like this just doesn't have the staying power. This hasn't stood the test of time in the way that The Last House on Needless Street did. Both are fantastic blends of horror, murder mystery, thriller, and gothic genres all blended together. But Needless Street was that executed perfectly. Sundial was that with grander themes of inherited trauma, nature versus nurture, familial abuse, a lot of things. It was a bigger thematic triumph in that way. But Needless Street was a more well-crafted narrative, and a more gothic book that I just found a stronger connection with. But Katrina Ward is great, and this is another success for her. Absolutely. Then we have The Maidens by Alex Michaelides, I think that's how you say it. He's an author from Cyprus who moved to the UK, studied at Cambridge, and I think he lives here now. He's written 2 novels and 2 screenplays that were turned into Hollywood movies. And this is a piece of murder mystery dark academia. As someone who has lived in Cambridge, I found this a very comforting book because it describes a city that I have lived in, and a city that I truly love. Cambridge is one of my favourite places in the world, and enjoying a novel set in Cambridge was delightful, for obvious reasons. While this is a piece of dark academia because it is about a professor at Cambridge and some of his students, it is primarily a murder mystery story, a crime novel. Our protagonist is a former student at Cambridge, a woman in, I think, her 30s, who now works as a group therapist. She gets a call from her niece, who she actually raised, and that niece is currently at Cambridge. She calls up her aunt and says, one of my friends was found dead. And so our protagonist goes to Cambridge and sort of gets involved in the murder mystery situation. One thing I really like about this is that there is a cop, a detective, who is put on the case, and he's an asshole and not very good at his job. So depicting a cop as useless, great, love it. And I do think that this was a really well-executed murder mystery. What's really fun about it is that a professor is the primary suspect. Our protagonist believes in her heart of hearts, as does her niece, that this one professor is killing off his students one by one. The prologue makes it clear that that's what she thinks, and all the way through the novel, he is her prime suspect, and the two of them enter into a kind of battle of wits, where he is challenging her to prove that it's him, and you fully go all in on this, while a tiny voice in the back of your mind goes, wait for the twist, there will be a twist, it must be someone else. But the plot, all the evidence, the protagonist, everything about it is pushing you towards him to the point that you go, okay, this isn't really a murder mystery so much as just pinning down this guy and proving he did it, because he is a villain, he's a monster, he is challenging us. And that's really, really fun, because you have the doubt at the back of your mind, while also thinking, no, it probably is that straightforward. Fascinating. I really enjoyed that. This became my new favourite American horror novel, bar none. It is just about, at the time of recording, to become a Hollywood film directed by M. Night Shyamalan, which means because it's Shyamalan, it could go either way. It could be dreadful or it could be wonderful. But the source material is here, and it's wonderful, so I feel like he can't really screw it up in terms of narrative. It's here. He didn't write it. Paul Tremblay did, and it's amazing. The Cabin at the End of the World is set in a cabin. The whole thing. You're in a cabin. You've got a married couple and their adopted daughter. The daughter is playing outside. She's catching grasshoppers in the grass. There's no one else around. And a man walks all the way down the long, long road to the cabin. And he stops and he chats with her. And he says, hi there. Your daddies are going to have to let me into the cabin. I've got 3 friends coming with me. We all have weapons. We're not going to hurt you with our weapons. But you need to let us into the cabin, because you're going to help us save the world. And you're like, what the fuck? And it's really, really great. There are so many twists and turns. This is a book about faith versus logic, about fact versus superstition, about cult mentalities and behavior. It's enthralling from beginning to end. In fact, I'm ready to read it again. I loved this book. I expected to enjoy it, because I always enjoy Tremblay's books. But I didn't just enjoy this, I really loved it. One of my final reads of the month was this, She and Her Cat by legendary anime film director Makoto Shinkai, who directed Your Name and Weathering with You, and a new film of his that came out in Japan last year and is coming out in English this year, which I'm very excited for. This was based on his first ever animated short that he made, just a 5-minute animated thing about a woman and a cat, which I haven't seen. And then he got to expand it into a novel. It's really short, it's 150 pages, and it tells the story of a neighborhood in Tokyo where you've got a bunch of different women and their pet cats. The cats can talk to each other and they go off and have little adventures, and then they come home to their women and keep them company, and the women are all going through things. They're having a difficult time one way or another. And you get to learn about their lives, you learn about the cats, you learn about the relationships, and ultimately, as I said in my video, this is a book about how having a pet, specifically having a cat, in Shinkai's mind, makes your life a bit better. Cats just make life easier, better, more fun, etc. And I love cats, so I can't disagree. And my final read of the month was this, The Boy and the Dog by Seishu Hase. I've never read any of his books before. I think at the time of recording, this is the only book of his that is translated, and it was translated by Alison Watts, who always does a great job. And this is a really, really great book. It tells the story of a dog called Tamon, who was somehow involved in the Tohoku earthquake. Presumably his family was lost or relocated, and he's trying to find them. And you follow this dog as he moves through 6 different lives. The book is divided into 6 sections, and each one is about the dog getting involved in the life of a human or a pair of humans. So you know he's going to constantly change hands. And all the while he's journeying south through Japan. He keeps looking south. He's following his nose. He thinks that his owner or someone he knew in the past is out there, and he's trying to get closer to them and eventually find them. And along the way, he falls into the lives of different people. Each person is quite unlikable at the beginning, which is something I really liked. You meet a new person, and they're annoying, or villainous even. They're not a very nice person. By the end of it, you love them to pieces. Hase is really good at writing short, small redemption arcs. And all the while, you've got this dog as a companion. It's absolutely lovely. I was really taken by this novel. My first review of this year was Whale by Chon Myung-kwan. This is a legendary piece of Korean fiction that I really, really wanted to love. My first review of the year was a Korean book that everyone likes, and I hated it. I explained in my review that I couldn't even finish it, and normally if I can't finish a book I wouldn't review it, but I had a lot to say and I wanted to discuss it. Whale is a fascinating novel. It is a brilliant piece of satire. It's really, really funny. It's surreal and strange and fantastical and farcical, and there's so much of it to love. But it's full of disgraceful misogyny. And I kept thinking the misogyny has a point. There is a reason the author is being misogynistic through the events and the characters and the relationships. There's a reason for it. There has to be, because the whole book seems so farcical and satirical. And yet I kept reading. I got nearly halfway through, and I just went, no, this is just awful. And not just misogyny, but treatment of mentally ill and disabled people as well. And you get to the point where you go, no, there is no good reason for this. And in the end, I couldn't get through Whale. I'm really annoyed. I'm annoyed at myself for not having finished it. I'm annoyed at the book for letting me down. And even if there is a greater point to all of this misogyny, if you have to bury the lead that much, you're just going to piss your readers off and they will quit before they get to whatever this point might be, if there is one at all. And that's exactly what happened to me. Very annoyed. Another book that I reviewed was The Luminaries by Susan Dennard. I should state that the press release that I got along with this book said that it was out at the end of January, which is why I reviewed it at the end of January. And then I was looking at bookshops and on their websites, apparently it's not out till like March. One bookshop said, yeah, we're stocking it at the end of January. And then 10 others said, no, it's March. I don't know. I reviewed it anyway, because that's what my press release said. The Luminaries is a piece of American YA urban fantasy, which in my review I described as Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird meets Supernatural or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If you replace the cast of Buffy or Supernatural with the cast of Lady Bird, you get this book. It is a coming-of-age YA narrative set in a world where supernatural creatures are real. They roam forests in different areas of the world, and they are born from the dreams of these strange sleeping spirits that nobody understands, and you just let them sleep. I really like the mystery of what these spirits are, and I enjoyed pretty much everything that the book did. It lacked a lot of world building. There's a lot of mystery that shouldn't be mystery. There are things that really needed to be explained that weren't. But it's a great example of how to just refine the YA formula, which is a pretty tired and predictable thing. And this book remained predictable. I knew every twist and turn that was going to come, but I still enjoyed it. It was still a fun book to read. At no point was I bored or even irritated. I just went along with the ride and had fun. I wish it did more, and as I said, I wish that the world building had been greater, but it was a pretty formulaic piece of YA fantasy that did everything it needed to do. If you like YA fantasy, there will be nothing in here for you to dislike. But since YA fantasy isn't really my thing, it's not particularly literary or experimental, there is a formula to these books, it was never going to blow my mind. It just couldn't. But I could tell that it was a very well-written piece of what it is. Yeah, The Luminaries was fine. Another collection of short stories that I really enjoyed was Parallel Hells by Leon Craig. I was very, very impressed with this, to a point. It was quite interesting how I would say half of the stories in this collection are absolutely brilliant. Frightening, twisted, disturbing, fun, creative, imaginative, queer. I enjoyed them a lot. I got quite lost in them. Others were really, really boring and fell flat. This is a very divisive collection. I really felt that every other story in here was a winner or a loser. It kind of went back and forth with no middle ground. I would read a story and go, no, that's a dud. And then I'd read another one and go, wow, this is one of the best short stories I've read in a long time. There was just no in between, which I find quite interesting. There you go. This is a book that I've wanted to read for a long time. In fact, I've wanted to read this author for a long time. This is Queen of Teeth by Hailey Piper. Hailey Piper is an American author who has published loads and loads and loads of short stories, novellas, and novels with small indie presses around the US and online. And she doesn't have a UK publisher, so getting my hands on her books in the UK is quite a tall order. At least as far as I can tell. Every time I go into a bookshop, her books just aren't there. I ended up getting this off Amazon. She's a writer of experimental, dark, twisted, alternative fiction. Her books have a kind of B-movie horror sensibility to them, which I absolutely love. She's a transgender author who writes a lot of transgender stories, or at least stories that could be allegorical about being trans, or in some way are queer. And Queen of Teeth is a great example of that. It really feels like a Hammer horror story. Queen of Teeth is about a young woman who wakes up after a one-night stand in the bed of another woman, and the sheets are covered in blood, and she goes, oh shit, this is embarrassing. I've started my period early or unexpectedly, and I've bloodied the sheets of another girl. That's awkward, but she'll understand. Then she realizes, oh no, this isn't a period. I have teeth in my vagina now. And not just a few fangs or whatever, like a full set of human teeth, incisors, molars, etc. That's just what the opening is now. It's teeth. As the story goes on, we learn about a pharmaceutical company that did something to her while she was still in the womb 30 years ago, and they might be responsible for it. She has had to constantly run tests and be monitored by this company because of side effects of a drug that they gave her while she was still in utero. And this must be the reason why. And so this is kind of a book about intellectual property and giant corporations, especially pharmaceutical corporations in the US, and their control over ordinary people in very literal ways. As this short novel progresses, the teeth become a personality, and she actually sort of shares her mind with an entirely other consciousness. And the thing inside her becomes more than just a mouth, more than just teeth. She starts to transform. It is wild. It is a proper B-movie. It is really schlock horror, and I loved every second of it. One of the manga that I read was a new shonen manga called Danda Dan. It was written and drawn by Tatsu Yukinobu, and wow, I had a lot of fun reading the first volume of this, and I'm going to carry on. It tells the story of two, I think, middle school or high school kids. A girl and a boy. The girl is really cool and really popular and boy crazy. The boy is a creepy little nerd. And they end up becoming friends by accident when she defends him from getting bullied by the jocks in the school. And it turns out that she's really, really into the idea of ghosts and the supernatural, while the boy is really, really into aliens and science fiction. He believes aliens have visited Earth and are currently doing so. She believes that there are ghosts haunting places around the country. And they want to prove the other wrong. So he goes to a place that's haunted, she goes to a place that has seen alien activity, and it turns out that they were both right. She gets abducted by aliens, and he gets haunted and possessed by a monstrous ghostly spirit of an old woman. And then they have to help each other escape and fix what's gone wrong. And they end up both receiving superpowers as a result. It's crazy fun. And you think, God, could there even be like a budding romance here, maybe? It's charming, it's adorable, it's funny, it's amazingly well drawn. The monster design is truly scary, almost Junji Ito levels of creepy, imaginative horror. Or like a Dark Souls game. The way that the monsters and ghosts are depicted here is frightfully imaginative and genuinely quite chilling. I loved that. But it's also kind of kid-friendly, I guess, if you overlook the scary monsters. Shonen manga is weird. So often something is called shonen, which means it's suitable for young boys, and in actual fact, like, it so isn't. Like, Chainsaw Man is a shonen, but it's not. Like, it's just not. Whatever, I'm not in charge of the manga. But Danda Dan was a really, really fun read, and I can't wait to get to volume 2. The other manga I read, I don't have much to say about. It was one that I've had on my list for so long, and it's one that is so beloved, and it's Noragami Stray God, which is a manga that people absolutely adore. It was fine. I really didn't get the big deal. It's about a god who currently is basically homeless and unemployed because he doesn't have a shrine of his own. No one worships him, no one knows or remembers who he is, and so he does odd jobs and he befriends a girl. I really struggled to care. I really did. I really thought I was going to love Noragami, but I didn't really get it. Danda Dan was way more fun. The last 3 books that I have to talk about each have their own video, so I'm not going to dwell on them too much. This is Now She Is Witch by Kirsty Logan. This was a huge success for me. This book was an amazing way to kickstart this year. It came out this month in January, and oh wow, this is an amazing piece of what we're now calling witch lit. I've read so many books on witches. You can go watch other videos and read a big article that I have where I just collect all the witch lit books I've read. And I've got more to read as well. I'm going to do another video soon, and that video will include this wonderful book. It's set in a non-specific medieval time where you're following a young girl who has just come home from some sort of sanctuary for religious people who were abusing her and setting her straight, I guess. She comes home, her mother has been killed because witch hunting, witch finding, patriarchy, etc. Another young girl comes up to her and goes, right, you've suffered, you've been punished, your mum is dead, your house has been burned down. Do you want to come with me to this local stronghold and kill its lord? And she goes, yeah, right. I've got nothing else to do. So these 2 girls go off on a journey to get to this big castle, and they're going to kill this evil lord. Go watch my video on it. I'll explain it in a lot more detail and in a much better fashion. But if you love books about witches, if you love feminist literature that is angry at patriarchy, who wants to get back at patriarchy, you need to read Now She Is Witch. This was another book that came out in January that I also adored. The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. This is a piece of dark academia with a twist, as my video says, if you go watch my video on it. What makes this different in the world of dark academia is that instead of being set at a prestigious old university, it's set in a museum, or an offshoot museum from the Met in New York City. The Met has this secondary museum called the Cloisters, which focuses on medieval and Renaissance art, and it also has a bunch of gardens in it full of poisonous plants. Our protagonist is a young woman who was supposed to do a summer job at the Met, but was pushed into the Cloisters, and so she gets to know the guy who curates this museum, who happens to be obsessed with tarot cards. And as a trans girl who legally had to take up tarot in order to transition... Oh, I keep making that joke. I got really into tarot recently. I absolutely love it. And so reading this book, a piece of dark academia, a piece of gothic fiction, a murder mystery that's also heavily about tarot, was a lot of fun for me, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is also a debut novel and a really good one. And finally we have Elektra by Jennifer Saint. Jennifer Saint, like Natalie Haynes, is ruling the world when it comes to Greek mythology retellings with a feminist twist. Her debut novel Ariadne was wonderful, and Elektra is even better. And I cannot wait for Atalanta, which is coming out, I think, in April. I will now read anything that Jennifer Saint does. What was also really fun for me is that last week I went to go see The Burnt City, which is a 3-hour-long experimental interactive play with barely any dialogue, where you walk around a huge kind of warehouse divided into rooms like a labyrinth. You go from stage to stage, room to room, setting to setting, and you follow the Mycenae-Trojan War. You watch the Mycenae side, and then you watch the Troy side, you watch all of these events happen, and you also watch Hades and Persephone interact, and they're like the only 2 characters that have any dialogue. Burnt City is incredible. There is so much about it. I could even do a full video on it. I might have to go see it again, because you can watch it multiple times, although it's expensive. And I was utterly amazed. But what really helped is the fact that I read this beforehand, and Elektra covers every aspect of the Trojan War in perfect detail. So if you go see Burnt City, read this first, and it really helps you. More than any other book set in the Trojan War has for me, including Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes. Elektra really helped with the details of Burnt City. So it was fun to read this and then go see that, for sure. That was crazy fun for me. Anyway, Elektra is great. It's so great. Go watch my video where I talk about this and Stoneblind by Natalie Haynes. They're 2 amazing books, and oh, I love this. I really did. Okay, there were 2 manga and 13 novels or short story collections that I read in January. Busy month, lot of fun, loads of great books, several of which came out in January and I couldn't resist picking up as soon as they came out. I got some really, really fun stuff coming up in February, including my first ever interview video. I will be interviewing someone very exciting, so look out for that very soon. In fact, the day this video goes up is the day I'm recording that interview, so that's exciting. Subscribe for books.